My name is Sarah. I am 34 years old, and I never thought a simple blinking blue dot on a digital map would completely shatter my reality. My husband had just left for what he claimed was a mandatory 3-day work conference, kissing my forehead and promising to call the moment he landed. But after 24 hours of total silence and a heavy gut feeling that kept me awake all night, I nervously opened the location tracking app we shared for emergencies. My heart dropped violently into my stomach when I saw he was not in a busy hotel 1,000 miles away, but parked right outside a suburban house just 45 minutes from our own home. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely hold the phone, realizing the man I had slept next to for 8 years was a total stranger. I grabbed my car keys, unaware that what I was about to find behind that front door would break my heart in ways I could not even begin to imagine. To truly understand how much this betrayal destroyed my soul, you have to know exactly how deeply I trusted him. My husband, David, a 36-year-old accountant, was the kind of man everyone thought was reliable. We met back in college, and from day one, he was the calm, stable force in my otherwise chaotic life. We were actively planning to start a family, and we had just finished painting the spare bedroom into a nursery. The week before he supposedly left for his trip, absolutely nothing seemed out of the ordinary. On Wednesday evening, he casually mentioned his firm was sending him to a weekend corporate retreat. He packed his black suitcase, carefully folding his shirts. He hugged me tightly by the front door on Friday morning, told me he loved me more than anything, and pulled out of the driveway. I waved happily from the porch, totally oblivious to the massive lie driving away from my house. The very first glaring sign of trouble started on Friday night. Usually, whenever he traveled for work, he would always call me from his hotel room. I waited up until well past midnight, but my phone never rang. By Saturday afternoon, the silence from his end was deafening, and pure panic was setting into my bones. I desperately needed someone to talk to, so I called my best friend, Jessica, a 34-year-old emergency room nurse who always knew how to calm my racing thoughts. I frantically explained the bizarre situation, pacing back and forth across my living room floor. She listened patiently before gently suggesting that maybe his phone battery simply died. She tried her best to be the calm voice of reason, begging me not to jump to the worst possible conclusions. But even as she said those reassuring words, I could clearly hear a hint of doubt in her voice. I just knew something was horribly wrong. I sat alone on the edge of our neatly made bed when I suddenly remembered the digital family sharing app we had installed on our smartphones almost 2 years ago. We never actually used the application in our daily suburban lives. My fingers trembled uncontrollably as I opened it. The map slowly zoomed in on a quiet residential neighborhood just a very short drive away from my own zip code. The blue digital dot was stationary, resting perfectly right on top of a specific residential address on Elm Street in a neighboring town, just 45 minutes north. My panicked brain was desperately trying to come up with innocent excuses. Maybe his expensive phone was stolen, but deep down, my female intuition was loudly screaming at me that he was lying. I threw on my winter coat, grabbed my purse, and practically ran to my car. The entire drive there was an absolute blur of hot tears and terrifying racing thoughts. When I turned my car onto the quiet pavement of Elm Street, my heart was violently hammering against my ribs. It was a perfectly quiet, middle-class neighborhood filled with nicely manicured green lawns and colorful children's bicycles. I drove at a painfully slow crawl until I approached the exact address displayed on the app. I pulled my car over to the curb and turned off the engine. Sitting right there in the concrete driveway of a small blue house was my husband's very recognizable silver sedan. His custom license plate was staring right back at me through the glass, instantly confirming my worst fears. I sat frozen inside my car for 20 agonizing minutes, silently watching the house. A million painful questions exploded inside my head. Whose charming little house was this? A freezing cold chill slowly crawled up my spine. I knew I had to know the absolute truth. I forced my shaking hand to pull the handle and open the car door. My weak legs genuinely felt like they were made of solid lead as I slowly walked down the concrete sidewalk toward the unfamiliar blue house. Every single agonizing step I took felt like I was slowly walking to my own emotional execution. As I nervously got closer to the front porch, I could clearly hear the faint sound of a cartoon television show playing loudly inside the living room. I walked straight up the paved driveway, walking right past his familiar silver car, and stepped heavily onto the wooden front porch. There was a small welcome mat resting by the door that had a cheerful picture of a cartoon dog printed on it. It looked so painfully domestic, so sickeningly normal. I took a deep breath, desperately trying to steady my violently shaking hands, and slowly raised my closed fist to knock on the heavy front door. Just a few agonizing seconds later, the heavy wooden door slowly swung open. Standing right there in the doorway was a young, attractive woman I had absolutely never seen before in my entire life. She was naturally pretty, wearing comfortable gray sweatpants and holding a bright pink plastic sippy cup. She looked at me with a polite, slightly confused smile. Before I could even find the words to ask who she was, I clearly heard a deep male voice call out cheerfully from deep inside the cozy house. It was a familiar voice I knew significantly better than my own. My husband walked casually into the front hallway, happily carrying a little boy who looked to be about 2 years old in his strong arms. He was laughing warmly, playfully tossing the giggling child up in the air. Then he slowly turned his head toward the open door and saw me standing frozen on the porch. The color instantly drained from his face. Time completely stopped moving in that horrible hallway. The young woman looked rapidly back and forth between the two of us, her polite smile entirely fading as she finally noticed the absolute terror swimming in his wide eyes. The little boy continued to giggle softly, completely unaware that his father's carefully constructed universe was aggressively collapsing right there in the doorway. The sharp, physical pain in the center of my chest was so incredibly intense, I genuinely thought I was having a massive heart attack on a stranger's porch. He quickly dropped his arms, gently putting the confused child down on the floor, and took a hesitant step toward me, weakly stuttering my name. The woman sharply asked him who I was, her trembling voice tinged with sudden panic. In that one catastrophic split second, the brutal reality of his secret life broke my trusting heart into pieces. I did not scream in anger. I did not violently cry or throw a dramatic tantrum. The psychological shock of the situation was so incredibly profound that it totally numbed my vocal cords and froze my entire body. I just stood there and looked right at him, quietly absorbing the absolute cowardice written all over his pale face. He desperately reached out his trembling hand toward me, pathetically begging me to just come inside and let him explain everything. I quickly stepped back, out of his physical reach, utterly disgusted by his presence. The young woman standing behind him suddenly started crying hysterically, loudly demanding to know exactly what was going on in her house. I looked her right in her tear-filled eyes, actually feeling a strange wave of pity for her, because she was clearly a tragic victim of his massive lies too. I simply stated that I was his wife, and I turned and walked away forever. I drove back to my house in total, suffocating silence. I did not turn on the car radio to distract myself. I just stared straight ahead at the empty gray road, feeling completely hollowed out and dead inside. By the time I finally walked through my quiet front door, my cell phone was aggressively blowing up with dozens of missed calls and frantic text messages from his number. He was endlessly begging for my forgiveness, making up ridiculous excuses, and absurdly claiming it was just a stupid mistake. But my logical mind knew there is absolutely no such thing as an accidental secret family. I called my best friend again, collapsing on the floor and crying so incredibly hard I threw up in the kitchen sink. She rushed over immediately, quickly packed a large suitcase for me, and kindly let me stay in the spare bedroom at her apartment. I made a silent promise to never see him again. The next morning, running on adrenaline and zero sleep, I hired the most aggressive, ruthless divorce attorney I could possibly find in the city. I was absolutely not going to sit back and let him destroy my emotional sanity and just walk away without facing the brutal reality of his horrific actions. I methodically gathered all our shared financial bank records, which finally explained exactly where all our extra savings had been mysteriously disappearing to over the last 3 years. He had been secretly funding his pathetic double life using our joint checking accounts. During the messy divorce proceedings, his entire fake world completely unraveled and burned to the ground. The other woman furiously kicked him out of her house when she realized he was entirely broke and had been maliciously lying to her about his marital status. His prestigious accounting firm promptly fired him in total disgrace. I walked away from the toxic marriage, keeping the house, the vast bulk of our remaining financial savings, and a fierce new understanding of my own personal worth. It took many long months of intense trauma therapy and countless sleepless nights crying in the dark to finally stop feeling the phantom sting of his ultimate betrayal. But I slowly and surely rebuilt my peaceful life. He miserably ended up living in a tiny, depressing studio apartment, legally forced to pay heavy child support to a bitter woman who despised his guts, while I completely flourished without the dead weight of his constant deception holding me down. I eventually sold the painful house we shared, moved to a beautiful, sunny new neighborhood across the state, and happily started a fresh, amazing chapter. The legal and emotional justice was absolute. Now, looking back quietly at that terrible, life-changing weekend, I truly realized that the agonizing pain of discovering the ugly truth was actually the painful medicine I desperately needed to save my own future. Sometimes the universe brutally forces you to open your blind eyes, even if the glaring light temporarily blinds you. I firmly learned that true inner strength is not about silently enduring a toxic situation, but having the bold courage to walk away from it entirely and demand the absolute respect you rightfully deserve. If you ever find yourself nervously staring at a blinking blue dot on a digital map, wondering if you should follow your gut intuition, do it without hesitation. Would you honestly have the incredible courage to walk right up to that stranger's front door and face the devastating truth, just like I did? Until the next story.